Hi guys, Pedantic Skeptic here, and I am going to make a video where I look at some of the supposed evidence for God's existence from some apologists, people who are generally regarded as the best that the theists have, like William Lane Craig and other people. So this is going to be a little bit of a compilation video. Um, I'm gonna look at a few different videos in this response and see if I can find anything compelling in these. So, let's see what we got around here.
One of the things I think that's happened in the religious community is you see people who are brought up in religious homes and they're taught the stories of the Bible. They're never taught any deeper philosophy or theology that attaches to that.
Yes, I am finding myself agreeing with Ben Shapiro. That does happen. Um, I don't know if it's gonna make a huge difference as to whether or not people believe in God. I mean, there are definitely people who are, just blind faith people, and there are people who have reasoned their way into God. Obviously, with a population of 8 billion people, we're going to have quite a bit of variation.
So they have sort of a children's eyes view of what God is and how to think about God. You sort of think of God still as the old man in the sky who's controlling things. What in your opinion is the most reasonable proof of God? What
I like how William Lane Craig kind of looks like a snow miser.
have you found to be the most convincing proof of God's existence?
Well, I think that those are two questions. For me, my favorite argument for the existence of God that I find the most compelling is a version of the cosmological argument.
Oh, Jesus. If this is the best these people have, we're going to have a serious problem.
Which goes like this: whatever begins to exist has a cause. Something can't just come into being from nothing.
Okay, I can grant that.
Secondly, the universe began to exist.
That depends entirely on your definition of beginning to exist, because the universe is eternal in our current understanding, but it's not necessarily infinite. Are you talking about something being eternal or something being infinite? Those are two different things.
I think we have both good philosophical arguments and scientific evidence for the finitude of the past.
Okay, that's a bait and switch. He's talking about the universe beginning, and he's also talking about the universe being infinite.
From which it follows, third, therefore the universe has a cause.
Not necessarily, because one, we don't necessarily know that the universe began to exist, but also that doesn't necessarily mean the cause was God.
And when you do a conceptual analysis of what it is to be a cause of the universe, you arrive at a being which is an uncaused, beginningless, timeless, spaceless, enormously powerful personal creator of the.
Whoa. Are you slipping in the personal part there? It doesn't necessarily have to be a personal creator of the universe. You don't get to do that. You don't get to say that the universe has a creator, therefore it's the Christian God, because this guy's a Christian.
The universe. So for me, that is a very convincing argument for God. But I find that with university students, that's not the most convincing argument. You can ignore philosophical arguments for the finitude of the past or scientific evidence for the beginning of the universe. But the argument that they find, I think, the most compelling is what I call the moral argument.
Oh, Jesus Christ. So, the moral argument is even worse than the cosmological argument. Well, let's see what he has to say.
And it would go like this. One, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist.
They don't. Our moral values are subjective. Not only are they subject to change over time, they're also generated by our own opinions of right and wrong. We have quite a bit of variation in what we view to be right and wrong. For example, veganism and, the slaughtering of animals, hunting, these other things. there are people who think it is permissible to kill animals for meat, and it is not morally permissible for me. Regardless of where I stand on the issue, that is a subjective moral value. Um, Now there are moral values that the vast majority of our population can agree upon. That doesn't necessarily mean it's objective.
That is to say, in the absence of God, everything becomes socioculturally relative.
What evidence do you have that there are things that are not socioculturally relative?
Too, but objective moral values and duties do exist. There
Can you demonstrate this? Give me an example.
are some moral absolutes, some objective values and duties. 3, therefore God exists. Now, this is an argument.
Well, the problem is that relies on the assumption that God is necessary to prescribe those, which you have yet to set up or demonstrate.
Which is impossible, I think, to ignore, because every day you get up, you answer by how you treat other people, whether you regard them as having intrinsic moral value or whether they are mere means to be used for your end.
I have a question. Have you ever done something irresponsible that could have led somebody getting hurt? Doesn't matter what it is. Have you ever, I don't know. Let me think of something that's kind of like not too much of a stretch. Have you ever driven recklessly because you were in a rush? Most of us have. Now, I could argue that that behavior shows a contempt for the well-being of other people. Even if there's no intention of causing harm to somebody else, you don't have in the back of your mind the possibility that your actions very well could cost. And I want to be reasonable about this. Sometimes freak accidents happen. I'm not talking about freak accidents. I'm talking about you assuming unnecessary risks because you're so stuck inside your own head about whatever. We've all done it.
And so this argument, I find, tends to be the most convincing for people.
Well, I don't know what kinds of people he's been chatting with. Let's click on this undeniable proof God exists. And it's loading. Okay.
Is there proof that God exists?
No.
In fact, there is.
Do tell.
There's a really well-known argument known as the argument from contingency.
I feel like this is the moral argument had a baby with a cosmological argument.
That proves God's existence. It goes like this. Something that is contingent does not explain its own existence. It is dependent on something else more fundamental to it. For example, a cup.
Okay, but fundamental doesn't mean more powerful or outside of.
Is dependent on other things prior to the cup. Perhaps somebody who made the cup and also the materials out of which it is made.
Sure, but the person making the cup is a natural entity, just like the cup.
Or even something like a rock. A rock is an aggregate of minerals, and so it's dependent on prior minerals to come together and form the rock.
Yeah, sure, but we're still in the natural.
But there's nothing about a cup that explains its own existence. It doesn't have to exist.
This is true.
Likewise, a rock. There's nothing about a rock that explains its own existence because it doesn't actually have to exist. Even the minerals out of which it is made do not, absolutely speaking, have to exist.
I see a Jesus on a cross behind you. How does any of this get us to Christianity specifically?
And we also know that from nothing, nothing comes. But we know that there are things out there. There are minerals. There are rocks. There are cups. There is, in fact, advanced life.
You're just naming a bunch of natural stuff. Where, why does that necessitate a supernatural being?
And yet none of these things explain their own existence. And so, why is there anything at all?
We don't know, and that's not really something that science is necessarily there to answer, but, there doesn't have to be an answer to that question.
There has to be a being whose very essence, what it is identical to its being, that it is.
What? What does that even mean?
So its whatness is identical to its thatness. That it is identical to what it is. In the case of everything that we see, what it is not synonymous with that it is.
This is failing to engage. What else do we have? Alright, let's see.
There's some people that don't believe certain behaviors are absolutely wrong or absolutely right.
Yes, that is true. For example, is it absolutely wrong for me to go to the pet store? Let's assume the pet store's still open right now. Let's assume I have money. Is it absolutely wrong for me to go to the store and buy a frog right now? Maybe. It depends. Because if I'm overloaded with animals and buying that frog means the frog is coming into a home where it is not being taken care of properly because I have 10 million other things to take care of, then that would be wrong. If the frog was obtained through unethical poaching practices or something like that, then it would be wrong by the frog. But under other circumstances, it may not necessarily be wrong in itself for me to go buy a frog from the pet store.
They would say morality is a matter of opinion or preference, and this is known as subjective morality.
Yes, it is evidently the only morality that we possess.
For example, they would say torturing babies for fun is wrong for them, but because it's subjective, it may not be wrong for someone else.
That depends. And just hear me out on this one. There are three major secular thoughts or secular means of deciding whether something is moral or not. The first one is the harm principle. That has to do with whether or not the action causes harm. The next one is empathy, and that has to do with whether or not the action is going to basically whether or not you would be okay with an action happening to you in a similar circumstance, or you would be okay not knowing if you were the one performing or receiving the action. Finally, we have this whole idea of promoting the greater good, utilitarianism, wherein if the action is more beneficial than harmful, it's morally permissible. And you kind of want to use a combination of all three of those things to determine the morality of something. It's not objective, but neither is religious morality, because religious morality is subjective from the standpoint of the God.
But aren't things that are wrong actually wrong? For instance, when can racial discrimination ever be right?
It depends on what you mean by racial discrimination. If you simply mean treating people differently because of their race, there are situations where it might actually be beneficial. For example, affirmative action is a form of racial discrimination, technically by the most strict definition of discrimination. Discrimination has a bad connotation, but dictionarily speaking, it just means receiving a treatment based on a factor. Affirmative action is one of the ways in which colleges and some other institutions fix the generational wealth gaps that keep minority groups from getting certain opportunities. So basically, they level the playing field for people who are disadvantaged. That is a form of discrimination that is not harmful. Additionally, in medicine, because of various socioeconomic factors, people of certain races are more likely to have different diseases, and so things like earlier screenings for black women for breast cancer would be a form of discrimination based on race, but a beneficial one. Now, if you were talking about, okay, if somebody's black, they're not allowed to enter this space, blah, 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 then I would say that that's wrong. And the reason I would say that that's wrong is because, one, it's not warranted, and two, it causes harm, more harm than good.
If I think racial discrimination is right, it's right for me, regardless of what you think.
No, it's right or wrong based on exactly what its ramifications are.
According to this view, when is child rape ever okay?
I would say that that's never okay. Unless there was some weird circumstance where that's the only way to save another child from certain death or something of that sort, but I can't fathom a scenario where that would actually come to fruition.
If subjective morality is true, I may not like it, and you may not like it, but if the child rapist prefers to take advantage of children sexually, then it's right for them.
So, what you are conflating is whether something is right or wrong, and whether something happens. Bad shit happens all the time. Things that shouldn't happen do happen. Things that are not okay, things that are wrong, from a perspective of our goal is to foster societal health and happiness. Things that go against that do happen. That doesn't make them right just because there are some people willing to enact them.
So a big problem that occurs with this view is, let's say you say something is wrong to someone, but they believe it's right.
Let's say you say something is wrong to someone. No, I'm just kidding.
Or vice versa. Who's actually right? If there is no objective standard to compare to, then neither of you are absolute.
So, what you're getting at here is this idea that when people disagree on something, there usually is a correct answer. Now, there are a couple ways this can play out. One, I disagree with, I don't know, this fox on something, right? And I'm correct. Maybe I disagree with the fox is correct. Maybe the fox and I disagree on something and neither of us are correct. Or fox and I disagree on something and we don't know who's correct. Those are the four, major possibilities during a disagreement, right? And there could be a situation, hypothetically, where the correct course of action is to harm a child. I can't personally think of one. And I am talking about serious, unwarranted harm. I'm not talking about, a kid dislocates their arm and you, pop their shoulder back in and it hurts them for 20 minutes and then they're fine and they get on with their day. I'm talking about, abusing them. Of course, the majority of people are going to think that that's wrong. But the thing you have to realize about a lot of these forms of abuse is that the people who are doing the abusing very often don't see what they're doing as abusive. The people who are doing the abusing of children oftentimes themselves are against abusing children. They just don't think that their particular behavior is an abusive behavior. That is the thing that this guy doesn't understand. And it's important to draw that distinction. And I'm not saying that there's never anybody who goes out there deliberately abusing kids, and I'm not saying that abuse is ever okay. But what I am saying is that in that person's mind, they don't view their actions as harmful or abusive in most cases.
Absolutely right, just subjectively right. And another way you could put it is, you can't tell me what I'm doing is wrong, and I can't tell you what you're doing is wrong.
Well, sure you can.
Is this not bizarre? Aren't things actually right and actually wrong? If you've agreed that things are absolutely right or absolutely wrong,
Don't get, there's a difference between being absolutely right and something being universally right. Absolutely has more to do with factual things. So, you know, the genus Astragalus absolutely is a plant genus that belongs in the family Fabaceae, for example. Or cyanide is absolutely toxic to a number of mammals. Um, Universally is a different matter. Um, Snake venom can be absolutely toxic, but not universally toxic. Because under some circumstances, for example, if you have the antidote on hand, then the snake venom isn't actually toxic to you. Now, universally just has to do with um, how commonly accepted something is. So something can be, or how many circumstances that incur this particular result. So, child sex abuse, for example, is universally wrong to the extent that there are no circumstances that warrant that particular behavior. Cutting into somebody is not universally wrong. It is absolutely harmful, sure. But if I'm a surgeon, for example, and I've been binge watching Grey's Anatomy for the last 3 weeks, but if I'm a surgeon, for example, and I cut somebody open because if I don't cut them open, their appendix will rupture and they'll die of sepsis, I am doing a minor harm to prevent a bigger harm. And so it's not universally a wrong thing to do. Now, if I walk around with a box cutter and I start slashing people I see on the street, then yeah, that's the wrong thing to do. There aren't, circumstances that permit my doing that, for example.
Like saying racial discrimination is absolutely wrong all the time, in any way, in every culture, regardless of opinion or preference, or that torturing babies for fun is absolutely wrong all the time, in any way, in any culture, regardless of opinion or preference, then you might not have thought about this, but you're actually agreeing that God exists.
No, I'm not.
How so, you might say? Consider this argument. Every law has a lawgiver.
No, because there are laws that are descriptive instead of prescriptive.
There is a moral law.
There. What do you mean by moral law?
Like saying things are absolutely wrong or absolutely right.
No, I would say things are universally right, universally wrong. And there are things like charity, for example, is not always universally right. And the reason I say that is because it is possible to, for example, donate stolen property to charity. Or donating so much of your money or whatever that you don't have enough resources for yourself, that would be another wrong.
Right. Therefore, there is a moral lawgiver. Some of you might dispute that this lawgiver is God, but remember this: only minds can make laws. And what mind could instill this law into every human mind that exists?
Well, remember that there aren't really any universally accepted moral laws across our species. There's always going to be that person who has an aberration where they don't see something as wrong. Just got through talking about this. Yeah, that wasn't very convincing to me. I think we're gonna call it here. I don't have the energy for this shit. But like, subscribe, all that other good shit, and don't forget to be pedantic, demi-romantic, and away from that Atlantic. See y'all in the next one.